everyone. I welcome you to the lecture series from the course Writing from the Margins. Within that, we are going to today talk about Dalit Autobiography, an introduction. So when we talk about Dalit Autobiography, the two terms are of extreme importance. The first, of course, is the word Dalit, and second is autobiography. So let's begin by unpacking the term Dalit first. What do we mean by the term? In the late 1880s, the word Dalit was used by Mahatma Jyotiba Phule for the outcasts and the untouchables who were oppressed in society. So it was actually popularized later on then by Ambedkar, who himself was a Dalit and who included all the depressed people, irrespective of their caste, into the definition of Dalits. Now, you see, we've used two words here, the outcasts and the untouchables, right? So, this actually brings to mind the social reality of the 19th century and somewhat even before as well, a practice that was part of the Indian society and that continued to be a kind of a social malaise, whereby there was discrimination against the lower castes, right? And on that basis, a certain section of society would be excluded from most things in society. And that's why examining this situation, Mahatma Jyotiba Phule in 1880s coined this term or used this term to refer to such outcasts or even the untouchables who were then, meted out with this kind of a discriminatory treatment. So, as we all are aware of B.R. Ambedkar, who is a very seminal name when it comes to, discussion of caste and the politics surrounding it. So, Ambedkar then further, who himself was a Dalit, he popularized the term and he included in that sense all the people irrespective of their caste, all the people who were, discriminated against into into the rubric of the term Dalit. Now we also see that the term covered people who were excluded from the fourfold Varna system and who thought of themselves as forming a fifth Varna. Now, what was this Varna system? We all know that how society, the society at a particular time was socially divided into the four Varnas, right? Where people were talked about or people were segregated along the lines of the occupation that they had. So in that framework, the outcasts then did not really find a mention. So therefore, when these reformers or when these thinkers were thinking of the predicament of these untouchables or the outcasts, they gave them a term Dalit in order to think about their issues and their particular social reality of the time. Now, so starting from Phule, going on to Ambedkar, and then in the 20th century, particularly in the 1970s, now the term Dalit was actually invigorated by the Dalit Panthers group. Now, what was the Dalit Panthers group? This was another a social group that originated in Maharashtra. And they also, gave attention to the condition of those who belong to the lower castes, how they were, not treated at par with the other people in society, right? And there was some kind of a very, so to say, charged engagement that the Dalit Panthers had with the issue, where they looked at not just those who are marginalized along the caste lines, but also they looked at other kinds of marginalities. But we definitely saw that when you notice the term that the group adopted, that is the Dalit Panthers. So the term Dalit appears even over there, right? And we noticed that how this term then further was invigorated. It was, again used in both popular and literary discourses through the Dalit Panthers as well, right? So we see then how the term came into being in the late 19th century, and continued to have currency until the late 20th century as well, right? So now, while it is a term which expresses some kind of a solidarity with the cause of the socially disadvantaged, it is a term that talks about this section of society, but there have also been certain debates about it, right? Now, it is suggested that the use of the term, also risked almost erroneously labeling the entire population of the untouchables in India as being united by a radical politics. So, what the question was that how it's like the it was considered to be some kind of a homogenization in that sense, right? Where all the untouchables were referred to with this term, and it seemed to be the case that how it was a kind it came to be a term which would refer to all the untouchables in different parts of the country. Now we all are aware that how India is incredibly diverse country with various communities, with different social groups, etc. So then the questions came into being that can we have one term then to talk about all those who are marginalized along the caste lines, right? So this is something that we need to keep in mind, and this debate, of course, was alive sometime in the 20th century, and definitely is of importance for us to think through even today, right? Now, coming to the next important word, which is crucial for today's discussion, that's autobiography, because we're looking at Dalit autobiography. Now, an autobiography as a form is essentially a biography of oneself narrated by oneself. You see, so it's a one can say a genre of writing, right? So now we see that how such works can actually take many forms, from the intimate writings, which can be in the form of diaries, which can be in the form of letters, right? So those writings which are perhaps not necessarily intended for publication, right? So while these kind of intimate writings are also, can be termed as autobiographies, then there's this other version of an autobiography as well, which involves the formal book-length autobiography, right? So the essence, of course, continues to remain that in the biography then, or in the autobiography, a life is narrated by an individual, and that life is, or that story of the life belongs to himself or herself, right? The other thing that one can say about autobiography is that it offers some, a special kind of a special kind of a biographical truth in that sense, right? What do we mean by a biographical truth? It means that through these works, we are able to understand the reality of an individual, the reality of the experiences that the person went through, and from the focus on the individual, then we realize certain social realities also shining forth, right? So we see that how it's in an autobiography, it's a life reshaped by recollection, with all of the recollections, conscious and unconscious omissions and also distortions, right? Now, let's not forget that when a person is writing about their life, of course, it's the idea of recollection becomes very, very prominent, because the person is thinking through, or the person is trying to recall the important moments of one's life, and is trying to reflect on them and write about them. So we see that how a lot of times certain conscious recollections filter into an autobiography, while there might also be certain unconscious additions as well. Now, what do we mean by unconscious additions? Now, which the author may not have already thought of, may not be, it might not be a part of his plan, but those details do, filter into the text because they have been a part of his or her own experience. So that's why we say that an autobiography then offers a special kind of a biographical truth. Now, in the context of today's discussion, is of course the idea of caste marginality, right? Now, in this context, social prejudice is actually countered by the proliferation of multiple genres of Dalit life writing. When we were discussing the term Dalit, we saw that how at the heart of this term is this, reality of segregation, um, discrimination, etc. So then, when we think of Dalit autobiography, then we notice that how it becomes a means for the individual to confront this social prejudice and also to counter it, right? And different kinds of Dalit life writings then have been witnessed. We've had autobiographies, we've had memoirs, testimonials, collective biography. So one can then say that autobiography forms under the larger umbrella of life writing. Okay, and within that umbrella of life writing, we have autobiography, memoir, testimonial, collective biography, to name a few. Now, of course, we have discussed at length what autobiography is, but let's also look at what do we mean by the term memoir. Now, a memoir is actually a non-fiction narrative which is based in the author's personal experiences, right? And it is a lot of times considered to be a subgenre of autobiography as well. So we see that how assertions in such a text in a memoir are assumed to be factual, right? Now, how is it different from an autobiography? Uh, on this account, where autobiography is then story of a life, of almost like a full life, right? Um, but a memoir is a story, in most cases, of a particular event or time, right? So that's what kind of distinguishes this life writing, which we call as memoir, from autobiography. Then, of course, we have testimonial. Now, what is a testimonial? As the word itself suggests, it's a testimonial narrative. Okay. Now, these works are those that have as a subject who's been interviewed on tape by the writer, and then the writer tells his life in the first person. Okay. So what happens here is that the author transcribes and edits the material to give it a final form, right? And in most cases, in a testimonial, the person being interviewed or the subject, so to say, being talked about, subject means the individual who's the focus of the narrative, is the one who has been marginalized. So that is the significance of this kind of writing. And of course, and the third term that we also included while looking at life writings was a collective biography. Now, what do we mean by collective biography? These were the words that present multiple short prose narratives about different individuals in the same publication, right? So while an autobiography and a memoir would, focus, and for that matter, even a testimonial would focus on a single individual, a collective biography in that sense then actually combines or presents multiple short prose narratives about different individuals. But of course, these different individuals are united by a commonality of experience. Okay. Now, if I come back to the question of Dalit autobiography, we see, or Dalit life writing. Dalit life or life writing of the Dalits then came up, it is believed, in Marathi as the post-independence Dalit literary movement began in Maharashtra. Right now, since the 1980s, the genre has spread to other languages as well. So, having a kind of a genesis in Marathi, we see that this form then spread to other languages post 1980s. So around the late 20th century, then one can say that this genre got that kind of sanction and became an important style of writing in the studies of society and caste. Now, when we think of the Dalit autobiography, some aspects need to be kept in mind which are common to most of the works which come under this category. First is that it documents history, right? Now, when we say documents history, do we mean factual history only? Um, Not exactly. So while it is based in real events from a person's life, we say that it is not just an individual's history, but it's also the history of society, history of the times, capturing the socio-political aspects that were prevalent at the time. So through this kind of a life writing, history is documented, history of the person, history of the community to which they belong, right? And also, of course, the surrounding conditions as well. Now, we also might wonder that why is history so important here? Because whenever we talk about uh, a situation of marginality, there is an element of erasure of the identity of such individuals, right? And what is the foremost way of erasing someone's identity? By not having enough material available about them, right? So then history, or asserting one's history, or writing about one's history, or about one's past, about one's culture, becomes a way to counter this kind of an erasure. That's why the element of history then becomes important when we think through the question of Dalit autobiography. Now, next, of course, is that such a text then also comprises a vocalization of aspirations. Now, otherwise, this, so to say, section of society would not have a lot of representation. They would not have platforms where they could express themselves. But then these life writings becomes a means for them to vocalize, to express their desires, their experiences, and also their aspirations, right? From there, we go to the third important part, or one can say the characteristic feature of such a life writing, or an aspect that we need to keep in mind, that is how it also counters prejudice while expressing, while asserting one's cultural identity. So, this also becomes an important segment of Dalit life writing. The other thing that we also need to keep in mind is that such a writing has a unique aesthetic. Now, when I say a unique aesthetic, it means that the fact that we are segregating, the fact that we are talking about the autobiography that belongs to the socially marginalized, and particularly the caste, those who are marginalized along the lines of caste, there has to be a particular aesthetic of their own, right? Now, that aesthetic then again becomes very much a part of the politics of what the writer is trying to convey through the text, right? Now, of course, this is a subject which in itself calls for a longish discussion, but for now, it's important for us to be aware of the fact that we need to keep in mind the peculiar aesthetic of these writings as well, right? Now, we come to the next point, which is of crucial importance while considering the Dalit autobiography. That is, one notes that there's a reference to the subjugated past, right? Or the past of oppression, the past of injustice, etc. And now this coexists with the politically conscious present. Now, what do we mean by that? This will become still more clear when we look at this argument that is made by Sarah Beth. Now, Sarah Beth wrote this essay titled Hindi Dalit Autobiography and Exploration, and there she says, and I quote, "Throughout the autobiography, the narrator's voice continually cuts into the narrative, interpreting past events in the light of the author's present political consciousness." Unquote. So, what do we see over here? Sarah Beth is pointing out that throughout the autobiography written by somebody who's on the margins of society, particularly on account of caste, the narrator's voice continually cuts into the narrative, whereby the narrator is interpreting the past events in the light of the author's present political consciousness. So you see there's a constant interaction between the past and the present, because the text is written at a moment where there is a realization of the need to talk about their history, to talk about their life. So this need to talk about this kind of an experience of injustice very clearly tells us that the element of political consciousness has already entered, right? Now, so from this position then, the past is recalled and reconstructed, and that past is the past which involves an experience of marginality. So we constantly see this this interplay of past and the present in the case of a Dalit autobiography. Now, the other thing that that Sarah Beth also says is that how in such works the narrative strands of progress and struggle also become very, very crucial, right? Now, she says, and I'll very quickly quote her in the context, she says that obstacles in the narrative, such as difficulty in school or disagreements between friends, are interpreted almost solely as the result of caste discrimination, while progress is conceived as struggling against this continuing practice of untouchability, unquote. So you see, she very beautifully draws out this thematic structure that one can locate in Dalit autobiography, that is the strand of progress and struggle. Now, when we talk about struggle particularly, she says that the struggles that were faced by the individual in society with with interactions, I mean during his or her interactions with multiple people, the disagreements, etc. So all those are interpreted as a result of caste discrimination, right? While on the other hand then, the idea of progress in such works gets associated with the fact that how the individual does not give up. The person, while going through these difficulties, also at the same time struggles against these ideas, and that struggle is what carries the seeds of progress or development, as they say, right? So these ideas are some of the important ones that Sarah Beth talks about. Next, what we need to remember, that when we talk about Dalit autobiography, the question of identity becomes very, very important, right? So we see that how a person's, there is a relation of an individual with one's own community and with the society at large. So these become the two levels at which one's identity unfolds. One is in terms of one's relation, connection with one's immediate community, right? And what kind of an equation that the individual has with the society at large. So at these two levels then we see the questions of identity raise head in these kinds of writings, right? The next thing, while we think through identity, which comes to our mind, is the idea of exclusion, discrimination, pain and humiliation is also brought to the public discourse through these writings, right? Now, while all these aspects of a marginalized existence are brought to the fore by Dalit autobiography, but we also see it is considered that pain in that sense becomes also a unifying phenomenon. It is not a text which is in that sense just talking about the shortcomings that the people have experienced, but instead this very pain becomes a unifying force which brings together all those who've been marginalized along the lines of caste. So then we see very clearly that in a text of Dalit autobiography, there's a connection between the individual and the collective self. Now the self then, one can say, unfolds at two levels. First, through the articulation of the experience of subjugation, okay, where the person discusses at length various moments, various incidents where he or she experienced subjugation, experienced prejudice, right? And that involves, now this aspect involves some kind of a owning of one's struggles, right? So when the autobiography deals with this aspect of experience, it is not to, not to regret this experience, but it's a kind of a, it's an attempt to own one's history, to own one's struggles, right? And that then gives the marginalized a kind of a confidence then to assert their selfhood, to assert their history. So you see how there's this very close connection then between the individual's experience and or the individual self and the collective self. So through the means of talking about the individual experience, it's the collective self of the community then which also is brought to light. So we notice that in these writings, while as we said, that autobiography focuses on the individual, focuses on a person's life experiences. So although the individual subject of the Dalit is portrayed as inseparable from the Dalit community, yet at the same time his or her own individuality is not discounted. This is another thing which we need to keep in mind, that these works are not just bringing out the social reality, are not bringing out the experience of a particular community, but we also see that how the individuality of the character also becomes an equally important part of such narratives. The other thing that one might say is that how in these texts certain cultural symbols which are unique to an individual's community are invoked. There's a rejection of discrimination, and there's arriving at some kind of a political consciousness. So one can see that roughly these become the important moments in a text of Dalit autobiography, right? Next, from this discussion of identity, selfhood, etc., we also come to the other point where we say that the idea of the self or the self-authority is, so to say, kind of contributes to constructing then a counter-discourse. So Dalit autobiography then, or the text of the Dalit autobiography, can be seen to be constructing a counter-discourse. Now we might wonder, counter to what? Counter to the institutional discourse. So we see that at the back of such a text then is this kind of a tussle between a personal discourse and the one which belongs to what is popularly known as the institutional discourse. That is that social reality which kind of binds or curbs an individual in some kind of a framework of subjugation, then is countered by this kind of an assertion of one's history, one's identity, one's unique culture, and the expression of one's desires as well, right? Or one can say aspirations. So therefore, one can say that these texts can be seen to be constructing an alternate paradigm that would make us look critically at those forces which bring in this kind of a division along the caste lines in society, and how in that sense then stands to be critiqued by those who go through it. Now, as we wrap up the discussion today, it's also important for us to look at some of the works, some of the important works of Dalit autobiography. There's Bama's text called Karuku, which was written in 1992. Vasant Moon's a text which is titled Growing Up and Untouchable in India, that was written. So it's also important for us to look at some seminal works which belong to this genre. Bama's text Karuku, written in 1992, Vasant Mohn's text, which is titled Growing Up and Untouchable in India, which was written in 2001, Maruti Pawar's Baluta, which is fairly recent, if you can call it that, in 2015. Like that, we have multiple such works that belong to this genre. So as we go over the term Dalit, the term autobiography, and we look at this genre and its different engagements, we understand that this becomes an important intervention in the writings from the margins. Thank you.